Hello and welcome to The Road to Year of the Villain, DC's 2019 line-wide event of sorts that will be taking place across a wide variety of DC comics, particularly noted in the pages of Justice League. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com, and today I'll be talking through the comics that have built up and set the stage for Year of the Villain, some of the comics we can expect to come out of the event, and some details as far as plot that got us to this point, as well as what Year of the Villain is, because it's not your typical event. It's really more of a line-wide theme, at least that's the appearance at this point in time. So we'll talk a little bit about how you can keep track of something like that, as opposed to an event comic that maybe comes out issues 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on down the line. So, Year of the Villain. What is it? Out of the pages of Justice League, written by Scott Snyder with art by Jim Cheung and Jorge Jimenez, and into the DC Universe at large for the remainder of 2019. I've got a link in the show notes to the complete reading order for Year of the Villain to date, and one main thing you'll notice in there is DC ran a Year of the Villain #1 special in May 2019 for just a quarter, so they were effectively giving this one away to set the stage as a primer for some of the events that are going to be happening throughout 2019. This includes Event Leviathan, which you can check out our Event Leviathan on the Comic Book Herald channel here, or podcast as well, but basically Year of the Villain was the focal point of that, and all of that is to say it's Lex Luthor banding the villains of the DC Universe together and distributing all of his wealth and resources to make their odds of success higher than ever. This was the main takeaway from Year of the Villain #1, and if you take away nothing else from this video or from the Road to guides, what you need to know is that Lex is on the path to bring the universe towards doom and give the villains the best chance they've ever had of success. Now, this is not exactly an idea that is totally foreign to comics. If you think about Marvel from late 2008 to 2009 had Dark Reign, which was sort of a situation where, hey, what if the bad guys won and we're running the government? Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, doing that. And of course, there have been a lot of different variations on the theme. This is writer Scott Snyder's version, again, ever since he's taken over Justice League in the DC Universe, which is actually, it feels like it's been a long time now. It's just over a year that Snyder's been on the title. That said, there's more background to Year of the Villain than just Justice League. All of it, I would say, is written by Scott Snyder with various collaborators, and really it starts with 2017 into 2018 DC Comics event, one of my favorite comics events of all time, DC Metal. And that really was an on-ramp for Snyder, showing how he could transition from someone in the DC Universe known particularly as a Batman writer and transition into a Justice League writer. And it works extremely well. That all builds to a 4-issue series called Justice League No Justice, which effectively sets the stage for Justice League, which is where we are today. There have been about 25 issues of Justice League at the time of this recording, one of which is a prelude, direct prelude to Year of the Villain, but I would argue really all 25 issues are prelude. Everything has been building to this point that Year of the Villain would make sense. So I think, again, if you're going to read any comics to set the stage for Year of the Villain, you're going to want to do Metal, Justice League No Justice, on into Justice League. And then you could spice up that with maybe the Batman Who Laughs miniseries, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So what do you need to know about all this Justice League writing? Again, 25 issues here. I'm not going to recap all 25 issues of Justice League, plus all those other comics I talked about. But what I will say is at the end of Metal, there's effectively an explosion, a cosmic event. And one thing to take away from this is we're talking in very cosmic, abstract terms. This is not a down-to-earth book by any measure, right? So we're dealing with concepts and abstractions, and it can all be kind of, if you try to pin down the details of it, it can get fuzzy. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people love about comics is it can be this sort of flighty, imaginative science fiction stuff, but it's also kind of hard to understand. And I say that not as a reflection of your own understanding, but of my own. I have a hard time understanding lots of this, and I have to read these things a few times to really get at all the big cosmic implications. But the one summary, I would say, is there's a focus in Justice League on balancing the universe, the scales of the universe between justice or doom, right? So it's taking the Justice League and it's taking the Legion of Doom, and it is very, very literal about one side of things scaling the universe towards justice and essentially extending a helping hand and helping others and reaching out and being, selfless. And then there's Doom, the Legion of Doom, and this is the path that Lex Luthor's eyes have been open to, which is quite literally in this case, described as doom, but really what it is it's sort of the selfish, inherent nature of man and woman to look out for ourselves. It's a very Randian sort of philosophy that we're positioning as, what Lex views as the absolute truth of what the universe was meant to be, is that it would be scaled towards everyone looking out for their own best interests, and that actually this is how the world is meant to be. This revelation is really what has driven Lex Luthor throughout Justice League, and what will continue to drive him in through You're the Villain and his schemes. And make no mistake here, despite the fact that the Legion of Doom consists of, everyone from Gorilla Grodd to Sinestro to Cheetah to Brainiac now to even the Turtle, kind of the dark horse of the group, Lex Luthor is very much in charge here. But even that said, Lex he's responding to a scale and, again, the cosmic scope of this narrative. And the cosmic scope in particular is tied to entities in the DC universe that we have seen before, as well as a couple new ones that are Scott Snyder written creations. One of which we've seen recently in the pages of DC Metal, and another that is new in the pages of Justice League. And those entities are Perpetua, is the sort of mother of all, really of all of the DC universe, but particularly of these cosmic entities known as the Monitor, the Anti-Monitor, and the World Forger, who is a cosmic entity that we've seen as the, who creates the dark multiverse versions of the DC multiverse in Dark Knight's Metal. And there's a lot of explanation that actually happens in the pages of Justice League, and in particular in some of the Legion of Doom focused issues. One of the cool things about Justice League as a series right now is every 5 issues or so, it's definitely not that specific. I have the full list of which ones are like this. There's a Legion of Doom specific issue, and I have that full list on Comic Book Herald, where you can check out the You're the Villain reading order, of course. But the Legion of Doom specific issues give you the perspective of the villains. Oftentimes this is co-written or written by James Tynion IV, writing partner of Scott Snyder's, and a really good writer in his own right in the DC universe. And what these give you some insight to on the multiversal scale recently is basically the narrative of, it's the whole history of the DC multiverse, right? And this is, I'm not going to explain it fully. It's something that I think would have to be its own video, because there's so much to it. But the narrative that we learn is that Perpetua is this enormous force in the world, that she in particular is looking to tilt the scales towards doom. So she's sort of the god, if you will, that Lex Luthor is looking up to. That he is saying this is what the universe was meant to be. It was meant to be in this vision of Perpetua. As it turns out, the Monitor in particular sort of worked to stop her, and kind of, conscripted the Anti-Monitor and the World Forger in these plans. But actually, the way Perpetua meant this universe to be was this universe of self-interest and, as it's described in these pages, doom. Okay, so that is the narrative of Perpetua. Again, reading Justice League will help define a lot of that, because again, this gets to like famous DC events like Crisis on Infinite Earths, the 1985 series, or of course DC's entire just legacy of the Crisis title. Look at the Jeff Johns written 2005 to 2006 series Infinite Crisis. This is dealing with those types of concepts that DC has done so well, the idea of a multiverse, the idea that worlds will live and worlds will die. Perpetua in this narrative ties into all of that. And intriguingly, we're also going to see, more modern reflections on multiversal events like Dark Knight's Metal, of course, where the character of the Batman Who Laughs, who, Scott Snyder and Jock are currently doing a miniseries, kind of spin-off out of Metal on that character, he's played a pretty major role. or a kind of surprise role in the pages of Justice League as well. So he's a dark horse out there during Year of the Villain, who I believe is going to be seen in the pages of a relaunched Batman and Superman comic. So that's the scale that Year of the Villain is ostensibly tied to. Where will we see Year of the Villain elsewhere in the DC universe? Honestly, you're going to see it just about everywhere. Year of the Villain is going to be in the pages, it seems, of almost every comic in the DC universe, with a handful of exceptions. And there's a little bit of structure to it, and it's been broken right now into sequences called The Offer, which I think is meant to describe Lex Luthor offering to the villains of the universe, selling them in his idea of why they should tilt towards Doom and be on his side with the Legion of Doom. That's going to go into Dark Gifts, then Evil Unleashed, and then we're going to go into a sequence called Doom Rising, and then we'll see where we go from there. But really, all of this, it's leading to all-out war. The Justice League, they're preparing for war. The Legion of Doom and Lex Luthor and all the villains of the universe, they're preparing for war. And that's what we're scaling to in the pages of Justice League. I think just about every other series in the DC universe is going to be tying into a similar direction, including, events like Event Leviathan in the pages of Action Comics and Superman titles that Bendis is writing. That's going to tie into this as well. So even though there's an event going on there that may seem like its own entity, it's going to be tied to Year of the Villain as well. So again, I would think of this less as an event per se and more as a line-wide theme that is going to be very much applicable kind of wherever you turn across DC Comics throughout 2019. So that's what we know leading into Year of the Villain. Again, if you want to know what's coming next, I would turn to Justice League 26 is where the story is going to begin outright. And then, of course, in the pages of Justice League is where it's going to be most heavily referenced. And if you want to find where you can read all these comics, again, going over to comicbookherald.com. I've got a reading order for Year of the Villain, and of course you can find reading guides for the DC Universe as well as all sorts of other great comics. So again, I've been Dave Busing, the founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. You are listening to Comic Book Herald, Road to Year of the Villain. You can find us on YouTube at Comic Book Herald. You can find us on podcasts at Best Comics Ever. And of course, you can find me pretty much anywhere online as Comic Book Herald. So thanks for listening, everybody. Hope this helped you understand a little bit more about Year of the Villain. In the meantime, enjoy the comics. Hello and welcome to The Road to Year of the Villain, DC's 2019 line.